So here I have Krita and it's opened up. There are no files open yet. This is kind of like the start menu. And I have my stone texture here that I'm going to turn into a tiling texture. So I'm just going to drag and drop it. And if I use the mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out. And this is the texture as it stands. So the first thing we want to know is this a tiling texture? So if we're in Krita, we want to enable wraparound mode. So if I go to view, you can see that wraparound mode is also Shift W on the keyboard. And if I click it, hopefully you can see that these edges clearly do not match. And therefore we know that this is what we need to fix up. So Shift W is the keyboard shortcut. Right, we are going to be using the cloned tool. Now, your palette may be very different depending on how Krita is set up, but the tool that we are looking for is this one, which is known as the clone tool. So this is the clone tool, and you see that I have two cursors. So I have to control both the source and the destination. Now, to do that, what I need to do is control left click to select an area, which is the source. So if I control and left click, it will basically pick the source. So I'm going to pick this little white stone here. And then as I move away, you can see that it's left this cursor behind. And if I go to another area and left click, you can see it's painted that stone in. And if I keep going, I can paint out this edge. Now, by controlling the size of the brush, I can try and make my blending a little bit more precise. So I've effectively painted out this left right-hand edge. And now it's pretty difficult to see where the joint is. I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to make my brush a little bit larger. I'm going to control click on this brown rock, and then I'm going to move my cursor off to the edge, and then I'm just going to left click, and then I can paint that in. So now I have a reasonable good example of a tiling texture. Shift W again, so this is my new texture. Shift W, we can see very hard to spot where the seam is, where the joint of the texture is. We can still see repetition, but our objective is complete in terms of painting that tiling texture. Okay, here I am in Photoshop, and I'm just going to bring in my reference artwork, which is this stone texture. I'm just going to drag and drop that in. So this is the artwork that we need to fix the tiling problem on the edges. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to offset the image so that we can see the edge. So we're going to wrap the image around on itself. And then we're going to use the clone stamp tool to fix those edges. So first of all, to offset the image, I'm going to go down to the filter section. I'm going to go to other, and I'm going to go to offset. And I'm just going to offset it both horizontally and vertically so that I can see both the horizontal and vertical edges. So now that I can see these edges, I can start working with the clone stamp tool. So this is the clone stamp tool here. And the way it works inside Photoshop is you have to hold down the Alt key to select the source, and then you left click to paint. So if I hold down the Alt key, you can see that the cursor changes. I can now look around the artwork and decide that I want to use this stone. So I'm going to Alt click on that stone, and then as I move away, and I'm just going to make the stamp bigger so you can see there's a ghost of that artwork. So I'm now going to come up to this corner and I'm just going to paint across some of the way. And I'm going to vary the brush size a bit as well. Now, if I go over the edge, you can see that it stops painting and I'm left with a hard edge. We need to be careful to avoid that. So I'm just going to leave that hard edge in, and I'm going to go back and select another area, Alt click, and then I'm going to paint that out again. So I'm going to paint across to about here. Once I've done that, what I'm going to do is think about this vertical line here. So again, I'm going to select, say, this white stone up here, Alt click, and as I'm going to be painting down the screen, I've started at the top. So I'm going to start here, I'm going to paint some way down. Just going to vary the brush size slightly as I go so that I can get different features. And that will probably do. Now you can see that I haven't worked all the way to the edge. And you want to avoid working your way to the edge because this will create more artifacts later on. So I'm going to do a filter and another offset. And now I can see that I have this unfinished edge and this unfinished edge. So again, same again, Alt click, pick some stonework, paint it in. And then again, I'm going to Alt click and paint that stonework in. And if I do another offset, we can find that now it's very difficult to detect where the edge of the screen is. So we have now successfully hidden the edge or the seam for this work, and this is now a tiling texture. So in Krita, I'm going to do the perspective correction. So I'm going to drag and drop the artwork in. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I'm going to need quite a bit of the canvas to adjust where the corners are going to be projected. I'm going to take my opacity down to about 50% just to make it easier to see the grid lines in the background. And then I'm going to switch to what is called the transform layer. So I'm going to click this, and I'm also going to go over onto my tool selection. I'm going to select the perspective option. And now I'm just going to move this. So that what I've done is I've pulled and stretched the image so that the corner of the building is up on this top right corner. I'm going to move the left corner over, and you can see when I do so that it's pulled the right corner as well. So I need to kind of just compensate for that a little bit as I pull these edges around. So that looks like this top is fairly straight. I'm going to adjust the bottom. So again, we can see that this edge of the building, which is going to be the edge of the final artwork, I'm just going to move that in slightly. And then same with this edge. As I move it around, you can see the image distorting. And I'm just going to pull this down so that the edge of these windows lines up with the edge of the image. You can see there's going to be a little bit of clipping where there's not enough kind of artwork in the original photograph, but that's fine. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to go away and do the calculation, and then I'm just going to turn the opacity back up to 100%. And so I now should have a fairly good perspective correct image. Let's look at perspective correction. So here's my perspective fix example. I'm going to drag and drop this in, and we now have our image. What we want to do is we want to crop this image so that we can fix the perspective. And the way to do this is to use a special version of the crop tool. So if I go to the crop tool in Photoshop and I select perspective crop tool, so if you click and hold on the button, it will open up a menu and we can use the perspective crop tool. And the way the perspective crop tool works is you click on the corners of something and it will select that region, and then when you press enter it will attempt to fix the perspective. I want a bit more of my component than that, so I'm going to select pretty much this region. Encourage you to check these grid lines to make sure that they line up with the artwork. So I'm fairly sure that these windows are all actually really in line with each other. So I'm just going to make sure that this line here runs down through the window edges. And so these lines should match the perspective on the photograph. This photograph is quite useful because it has orthogonal structures to it. That is, we can see vertical lines and we can see horizontal lines, and we know that they're at 90 degrees to each other. Okay, so I've marked it out. If I hit enter on the keyboard, you can see that it will take that geometry and it will fix it into a region, and that is the region that we need to be using. Right, you will also notice that there's a kind of cutoff up here, which is where I haven't done it quite so precisely. So if I press Ctrl Z, I can go back and I can try and do it again. So again, I can select my region. And then I can press enter. And what I should have, and again, I've clipped it slightly, what I should have is I should have a nice straight version of the photo, so that then I can then crop this out and use this and maybe generate a tiling texture from it.